Now, I know what you're thinking. DMS, have you lost your mind? You're wearing a pair of bi-directional. Is the treble not killing you right now? Well, it's actually not. That's because of this little device right here. This is the Arc Onar from IK Multimedia. It is a device, a DAC amp, that has a built-in DSP and calibrations to set headphones to a more flat frequency response, primarily for studio use, but I'm going to be digging into it today, doing my own measurements of the results from this and going over them with you guys. So is this thing worth the price? Let's talk about it. Now, this thing's interesting. It's battery powered. It's got Type-C in on the back, 6.3 millimeter out on the front. Of course, you can use an adapter with that. Also has an analog audio in. You can use that for monitoring, whatever you need to do, and then a series of control buttons and a volume knob on top. You'll notice these lights here. These are presets. These are all presets that you set up with the desktop software, and then you can cycle through them by pressing function and calibrate, and that gives you different options for things that you've set up in their software. Now, it's not just go in and make your own EQ profiles. You can do that to some extent, but they have a list of headphones you can choose from. So I'm gonna go over the build, some of the software on this, and then let's talk about the measurements and how it actually sounds. This little thing is built pretty nice. I did scratch the edge here, but as a result of that, you can see it is a little metal box and it feels hefty. This thing is actually built pretty well. The volume knob is nice and smooth. The buttons feel good and they light up when you press them. The switch on the back, very satisfying. The plug feels good. Overall, it's a nice little device. And it comes with a little carrying case you can fit your cable in too, so you won't end up doing what I did on the go and scratching it up. It also comes with these cool orange cables. There is a 3.5 millimeter that I have not used, and then an orange Type-C cable that also charges this thing while you're using it. You know what? Let's go on and plug it up right now. That way I can use this to monitor my microphone. And check, 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 check. There we go. Now I've got a signal from my microphone and from the DAC at the same time. Not bad at all. Now, as you can see, I have a few presets set up here. I have tested a bunch of headphones with this, but I wiped this preset so we can go through and I can show you how it works. I'm going to go in their headphone browser. They have all of these brands, and I'm just gonna type in 1990. I've got the DT 1990 Pro Mark II on my head, so I'm gonna select that. It's already giving it a little bit of headroom based off of their EQ changes to it. And for this one, I actually had to make some more EQ changes than just this to get it where I wanted it to be, but it's just a decent start. From there, you can either press this cal button right here, and as you can see that turns on the calibration of the software, or you can click the calibration button there, and there's tilts for making it warmer or brighter, which is just adjusting the overall leaning of the entire frequency response. There's a phase align button, which I'll talk about that in a minute. It actually adds a little bit of latency, so when I turn that on, my monitoring is getting just enough latency that I can barely tell it's not lined up with my voice. You can change what the function button is bound to, so it could be a mute like this by default, or I could set it to the phase align, so I can turn phase align on and off here, or I could set it to the virtual speaker, which gets turned on and off, which that only works when Studio Sim is on, so I'll press the studio button. Now this is doing a sort of weird speaker simulation, which before I talk too much about that, let's talk about the calibrations. So taking a look at a few headphones here. Here is the HD550 from Sennheiser. This is what it measures like stock and calibrated in red and blue. Honestly, they're pretty similar. It's not a massive difference, but the tilt is just a little bit better. It's getting better bass and a little bit less in the treble. Nothing crazy, but it is an improvement. Some headphones seem better, some headphones seem worse. Here's the HD620S, stock and calibrated. In some areas, it is improved. So we have better mid-range, a little bit of weird stuff going on right here at 3 kilohertz, slightly better treble above that, and slightly better bass. So a slight improvement across the board for the HD620S. K371, mostly a similar story with the exception that we're definitely getting too much 3 kilohertz on the calibrated profile. K371 stock, already not bad, a little bit wonky though compared to this. HD490 Pro, that one is kind of weird. So stock, I would say the 490 Pro is measuring better than it is with this calibrated profile. And that's kind of where it goes back and forth. So things like the HT600 are improved. The bi-directional DT1990 are improved. The HT800S is improved, but some headphones also aren't. And what may be happening is just a limitation of how many bands we actually have available. Not to us, but to the device. It seems like for the most part, this device has maybe 3 or 4 available bands that they're using to try and correct, and then we have 3 more bands that we can customize on top of that. So as an example, the DT1990 still a little bit funky after the calibration is done. So we could go back in here and we could say, work on the bass shelf or adjust part of the mid-range or change part of the treble, and we can, adjust the cue for these various things and make them either a bell or a shelf or whatever we need to do. But they are limited. So the mid-band can only go down to 100 hertz and can only go up to 5 kilohertz. I mean, that makes sense, it's a mid-band. The treble adjustment can only go down to 2K. The bass adjustment can only go up to around 400 hertz. You really don't need that much overlap, but it is a more limited EQ than something like EQ APO. Something else interesting happens when we turn on the speaker sim. So just opening up Room EQ Wizard, showing a bunch of the different measurements I've done on this thing. Here's the 550 stock, here's the 550 calibrated, and then here's calibrated with the speaker sim turned on. That's interesting, isn't it? So what we're getting is a similar effect to when you do measure speakers in a room. It almost looks like a not fully gated response of a speaker measured on a head and torso simulator. The interesting thing is we're not getting any additional excess group delay here. We're getting a bit more of an erratic frequency response, but there's no excess group delay. And what's really interesting is if we look at the impulse of it, we're getting these extra bits here that are very similar to if you were getting reflections in a room and you would normally try to time gate these out when doing a measurement. So again, just calibrated HT550, stock HT550, and then with the stereo simulation turned on, these extra reflection-like points added in here. Very interesting. So they claim it's not a virtual reverb or anything like that, and that it is an actual speaker simulation. We don't know much about what's happening there. It does provide an interesting effect. It kind of has a bit of a diffused sound to it, but it's not bad. It's just interesting. There's also individual simulations for speakers. So white 80s, come on, that's the Yamaha NS10. There's other in here like the black entry level 5 is definitely a JBL 305P, coaxial Gentle X, barefoots, things like that. So these barefoot monitors here, I did a measurement of what those measured like with the HT550. And let's compare the calibrated to that. So here's the calibrated result. And then this, it measured just a little bit quieter. Here, let's pull it up just to make it even. This is the simulated barefoot speaker. So you can see a little bit of bump here in the lows, more roll off in the sub, bit of a dip around 200 hertz, maybe just a touch less in the mid-range, a little bit more forward in the upper mids, lower treble. For the most part, pretty similar. It does sound relatively speaker-like. It's very interesting. There is a bit more harshness to the sound with this, and I do still recommend adding some EQ to it. So I'd pull these peaks down just a little bit and probably add a little bit of tilt. So going back in these, I'd probably pull the top end down just a little bit and tilt it just a little bit towards warm. But for the most part, you're getting something relatively similar to the tonal characteristics of some of these speakers. You're not getting the same sort of localization that you would with the speakers, but definitely some similar tonal characteristics and similar harshness that I think would be useful as a studio tool. Now, this is only so useful given the calibration for each headphone, so it really depends on how accurate the cal is for that headphone. Specifically with the HT550, let me grab that one real quick off my wall. HT550 did okay right off the bat, but you'll see when I press calibrate, I've done some more things here. These are extra changes that I made to get it actually a bit more neutral than their profile was to begin with. Now, there's going to be unit variation between headphones also, and that's going to account for the accuracy of their profile. So you can't get it perfectly accurate. This is the measurement of their calibrated profile, and then here is after my adjustments to it. Let me go on and move that up. There we go. We have stock in blue, their calibrated profile in orange, and then in this pinkish purple is what I've done to it with their software after applying their calibration. So you could do a manual sweep, just run a sweep, listen to it, and find the peaks and adjust it, but you only have 3 bands to work with. That said, with 3 bands and their calibration applied together, I was able to get this pretty dang far. But this does something else that's quite strange, and that's this button right here. the phase align button, which if I compare just calibrated to phase aligned, you'll notice there's some frequency changes happening here. And to better explain what's going on with this phase button, because we weren't quite positive, I brought in a man who's afflicted with the condition of being British.
Hello everyone, I'm GoldenSound, and at a very young age, I was diagnosed as British. It's something I've been struggling with all my life, but I've learned to live with my struggles, and so I'll push through. Anyway, about this phase thing. So the Arc Onar has this feature that purports to give you the exact same sound as listening to a pair of studio monitors in a real room rather than listening on headphones. But the interesting thing that me and Doug were chatting about is when you measure the headphones with this feature turned on, they don't behave like real speakers in a real room. If you want to make a headphone sound like a pair of speakers, you can't just correct the frequency response to match a pair of speakers. Headphones and speakers behave differently to each other in more ways than just frequency response, and one of these is the phase response. Headphones are what's called minimum phase devices. One aspect of this is you can predict the phase response from the frequency response and vice versa. In fact, we can show this with one of Doug's measurements. Here's a measurement of a headphone that Doug took with this feature turned off, and if we go to the group delay tab, we can see the group delay that was measured, and it'll probably look somewhat messy because the frequency response itself wasn't completely flat, but what we can do is click the settings cog and click generate minimum phase. That will tell the software to generate what the group delay for a system that has the same frequency response and was perfectly minimum phase should be. Once we do that, we can see the excess group delay, which is the difference between what that prediction was and what we actually measured. And the interesting thing is that both with this feature turned off and with it turned on, it is completely flat. There is no difference. Both with this feature on and off, the headphones seem to be behaving in a minimum phase fashion, but real speakers don't. With real speakers in a real room, you'll see something more like this. There can be a lot of reasons for what you're seeing here. Speakers not only have multiple drivers in different physical locations, they have crossovers, and at those crossover frequencies, the same sound can be being played by two different drivers at the same or slightly different times, depending on the crossover design. And you've also just got a room to deal with. You've got sound bouncing around, reflecting off walls, getting back to you at different times, and constructively or destructively interfering with each other as well. And all of this combines to mean that you don't have a minimum phase system. There are other effects going on. You will have some excess group delay and excess phase behavior. This tells us that they're not doing the traditional method of room simulation. Normally what would happen is what's called impulse convolution. So you capture the impulse response of a real speaker system in a real room, which contains both frequency response and phase response information, and you convolve that onto your playback chain. That basically modifies the sound in all the same ways that those speakers and that room would, including the timing and reflection information. And so, barring any colorations from the headphones themselves, which you'll need to deal with separately, the end result is you get the sound as if those speakers in that room were playing it. But as we saw, there's no excess group delay stuff going on at all. There's no room effects as far as we can see. So let's have a quick look at the impulse response too. Here, this is an impulse response of just one of the headphones measured without this feature turned on, and we can see a strong impulse, which is the direct sound from the driver into your ear hole, and then it just trails off because headphones don't have a room. Whereas if we used a set of speakers, you'd see something more like this. You've got the initial impulse, the direct sound from the speaker, and then you've got a reflection after it, which is probably the sidewall reflection. Sound bounces off that sidewall and gets to your ear slightly later than the direct sound did. If the room wasn't particularly well treated, you might have some other reflections showing up as well. If it was a very reverberant room, you'd have a trailing pattern of echoes and reflections. But that's again not what we see when we turn this feature on and look at the impulse response of the headphone with this feature. Instead, we see about 10 or so almost equal amplitude reflections and then an immediate cutoff. That's not how any real room is going to behave. If I'm honest, it's very unclear what they're doing here. The interesting thing though is that it's unfortunately not behaving like you would expect for a accurate room simulation. If you wanted it to behave like a real room, you'd expect it to measure like a real room. And when we're looking at both the phase response or group delay, and when we're looking at the reflection pattern, it's just not doing that. The other thing that me and Doug were talking about was the headphone calibration profiles on this device, because Doug took a bunch of measurements of headphones both before and after applying the calibration from the Arc Onar, and it was interesting that whilst most of the time it did shift them closer to an overall neutral response, it was kind of hit and miss in terms of how well it did that, and it didn't correct all the narrow stuff, the smaller fine-grained colorations in the frequency response. Those all just sort of stayed there. So I was wondering why that might be. Doug actually took it apart and we had a look inside, and it does seem that the ARM CPU that it's using is fairly limited in compute power. So I was wondering maybe it's just too limited to do complex convolutions that can precisely correct these. But then also Doug noticed, well, hang on, the UI has 3 bands of EQ. And so I thought, I bet we can check whether this is the 3-band EQ. We loaded up both the before and after measurement, and we used the after measurement as a target curve in Room EQ Wizard, then saw how closely can we match it just using a 3-band EQ, EQing the original measurement to try and get it as close as possible to the calibrated one. And the answer was, in all cases, almost exactly. With 3 bands of EQ, you were able to match the calibrated frequency response, thereby showing that this is almost certainly a 3-band EQ. Now, 3 bands of EQ is still really good to have and shifts a lot of these headphones far closer to a good and neutral response than what they were stock, but it is a bit of a shame that it only supports 3, because as shown by several of these measurements, that's not really enough to get headphones to what would be suitable for mixing and mastering on. But Doug's got plenty of experience with not just music production, but speakers themselves, so I'll throw it back to him to tell you what he thinks about it subjectively.
Thank you, GoldenSound. So this thing is $299. I think their launch price is a little bit cheaper than that. I think it's like $259, $249.99 launch, $299.99 is regular price. It is interesting. There are a lot of devices supported. It seems to consistently work better with most open backs than closed backs. And I think in the majority of cases, you're going to get at least slightly closer to a neutral sound with this than with the headphones built-in tuning. It seems quite good with most Sennheisers. Basically, almost every Sennheiser I tested, there was an improvement. And with some things, there weren't. Here's the stock DT1990 Mark II that I was showing you guys earlier, and then here's the calibrated profile for it. Honestly, still has some problems, but notably better than the stock tuning. And then with some adjustments, I was able to get it down to this. So, pretty close to like a sloped diffuse field response. Again, not perfect, we have some weird dips and peaks, but notably better than the stock response, and most of that was with just the click of a button. Not bad for something that is just easy to do. And for this next bit, the headphones are coming off. Here inside of this is another feature I like. Actually, a couple things that I think are clever. Number 1, this battery is replaceable. Look how easy that was. I took out 4 screws, and then here's the battery right here with a little connector on it. You can replace this battery. That's nice. And another thing, this 6.3mm connector right here. You may not see immediately what it is that's so cool about this. See if you can figure it out real quick. Just have a look. Did you figure it out yet? I'll show you. I am a big fan of repairability, as some of you may know. And the design of this is straight up clever. Now the screws are out. Look at that. This comes right out. Now you may be thinking, well, how is this connected? Are there no pins? Is there no cable? Is there no ribbon? No nothing? Look at that. The contacts connect to the standoffs it screws into, and that's how it makes a connection. I love that. That is clever, and this piece is easily replaceable as a result. That makes me very happy. Between that and a replaceable battery, that's good. That's good. I like that. Keep doing that. All right, now let me put this back together real quick. Oh, and one more thing. Since it is battery powered, any of those presets you set up in the software are saved to the device. So anything I set up on my computer, I can just take it with me. I can plug this up to whatever I want and just keep using it as is with all of my calibrated profiles, all the simulations and everything. So I can turn on the calibration, the speaker simulation. I could have this function button again set up to turn on the phase align feature, or one of the speaker sims that I have set up, maybe the barefoot one, maybe a Kef or a Genelec or whatever. And it's all operating on this device. So do I recommend the IK Multimedia Arc On-Ear? The answer is, it depends. For some audiophiles, yes. Depends on how close you care about it getting to a completely neutral target. There are some improvements that are made with this, but if you want it to be really truly accurate, you need to do some of the legwork yourself afterwards. You can do that with manual sweeps or with measurements online. The problem is you don't know exactly how close this is getting. In most cases, it is closer to accurate than the headphones are by default, just not all the way there. And especially with closed backs, it seems like your mileage may vary. If you are a studio professional, this is not a bad device. For on-the-go solutions, for something that is quick and easy, if you don't want to have software running all the time, this is a good solution because you could just set up your headphones and then run the device without software. And I do love the repairability. However, At this same price, you could end up with something like Sound ID Reference. We're going to have a microphone, you can calibrate your speakers, that does have also some really, really good calibrations for their headphones. The Sound ID Reference calibrations out of the box are pretty dang good. The speaker sims, while definitely not something I'd recommend to audiophiles, again, can add a certain harshness that is probably good for mixing. It would have been a nice tool for me to have that back when I owned my recording studio, and I would have gotten some use out of this. Again, it doesn't make listening more pleasurable, but that additional harshness and how it's going to probably not sound as good on some speaker systems is definitely something I would say is a leg up this has over things like Sound ID Reference for a mixing professional. And the real big difference between this and Sound ID Reference is going to be Sound ID Reference is more, you want just a dead-on neutral result that you can consistently count on. Versus this is, I need to mix with variety. I want to be able to simulate a bunch of different sounds, and I want to be able to tell how they're going to be good and bad in various ways. This is a more useful mixing tool for that variety, less so for its complete accuracy. And for that, I can definitely see this being useful. If dead-on accuracy is the concern, you don't mind running software the whole time in the background, especially as a filter between your digital source and whatever it is that you're listening through, whether it's your headphone jack, your DAC, your amp, whatever, then you're probably better off with Sound ID Reference. But if you don't want software running 24/7 and you want to be able to do all of this on a hardware box all in one as a DAC amp, especially a standalone piece that can just be used on the go, this is a notably easier solution for that. And genuinely, it is a nice piece of hardware, and it's also nice that it is repairable. So the classic, is it for you or not? It depends. I know, that's not the most helpful answer, but my goal is to educate you guys so you can make the best decision for your needs. And while strange in some ways, and in a couple areas definitely not perfect, it is still a pretty compelling device for what it accomplishes. So that is going to wrap up this video, guys. If you liked it, leave a like down below. If you want to get active in the community, you can get early access to my videos on Floatplane, and that's how I support the channel. You notice there's no affiliate links to this thing anywhere. If you want to use an affiliate link, sometimes I post affiliate links to things that I just like, but they are not audio products. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till next one, guys. Peace.